Hello, everybody. ELDR 6433 Seminar in Educational Leadership. I am your host for week 3, Dr. Jerry Burkett, back again with another podcast, lecture. I don't know what we're calling this. It's kind of a podcast, but kind of not, in the sense that I'm just sort of riffing here and trying to make this content interesting, because sometimes it's a little dry, it's a little boring. But through my research, I have found that podcasting is becoming a form of pedagogy that students prefer. And as I've already mentioned, and I don't want to belabor the point, but in this 21st century world that we live in, online learning doesn't have to be you sitting in front of a computer staring at my face. You can listen to it on Spotify, on YouTube, anywhere. At the gym, in the car, walking the dog, whatever you want to do. That's what's great about having accessibility, which is what I am trying to do. Just trying to make things a little more accessible and honestly just a little bit more interesting, because sitting behind a PowerPoint and just talking through slides and basically reading to you, I would hope that you paid for a little bit more. And look, I'm kind of funny. I am a little funny. I think I'm a little funny, and I'm a little entertaining at times. So I'm trying to do some of those things to make this interesting as we broach into week 3. I hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend. I hope you did something fun and exciting. I hope you were able to dodge the rain. Little rainy this weekend, as it were. I always think about my father on Memorial Day. I lost my father back in 2012. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he happened to pass away on Memorial Day weekend. So it's hard not to think about Dad during Memorial Day weekend, plus being a Vietnam veteran. So normally he is buried with naval honors at the DFW National Cemetery, which is, if you're in the DFW area, it's over in Dallas, over off Mountain Creek Parkway, next door to Dallas Baptist University, in a very, very beautiful hilly area that overlooks Mountain Creek Lake. It's very beautiful. They do a lot of great Memorial Day stuff. Normally I get out there to visit Dad, but I wasn't able to go this year. But that's okay. It's all good. So I didn't do much this weekend, but that's okay. So here we are on a Tuesday. We're going to talk about power, influence, and ethics as we talk about educational leadership. And I want to get into this conversation about the difference between power and influence, and how we can wield our power to influence people in both positive and negative ways, and then how this applies in an educational leadership context. So we're going to talk about power and influence and how that works. We're going to talk about ethics and framing our ethics and doing some moral reasoning. We talked a little bit about moral reasoning last week. We'll get into emotional intelligence. Talked a little bit about emotional intelligence last week too. And then we'll talk about how people follow and why they choose to follow. Because in the essence of educational leadership, and I tell my principal candidates all the time, and especially in the first class that they take, is that, why should I follow you? And I also talk about the first follower concept, and it's a YouTube TED Talk thing. The first follower is there's always a lone leader, but there's not leadership until you have a follower. And the first follower concept is that leadership is overrated, but the first follower who sees something in a leader can build momentum. It's a really cool video. I'll post it. It's fun. I won't bore you with it for this class, but we will talk about how followers are the ones that really push momentum. They're the ones that talk about leadership. Oh, that's a great leader. That person's amazing. So there is something to followership. And then we'll wrap up. I want to talk a little bit about your first major assignment. A couple of you have already turned it in, and which is fine. But if you wanted to pull back on that after I talk a little bit about it, you have a 3 to 5 page paper coming up, and it's sort of a big picture assignment. I'm kind of looking through it now, and I'm just going to give you, some tips and tricks from my perspective on how you can do well on this, because everything that we're doing in this class is, it's seminar. Seminar is supposed to be, questions and comments and talking, and it's hard to do it in an online setting. If we were face to face, there'd be a lot of conversation, but right now you just get to hear from me. But outside of that, we do want to set you up for success so that when you enter the prospectus and dissertation phase of your doctoral program, that you are starting to write, and writing is very, very important. And so how we can do that, and this is a good place to start practicing that. So that's what the curriculum was designed to do, so that you can start thinking about these leadership concepts and then applying them through writing. So we'll talk about that. So let's get into it. Let's talk a little bit more about power and influence, and how it works in educational leadership. Let's get into it. All right, let's talk about a word that makes a lot of educators really uncomfortable, and it's power. Honestly, people get into positions of power, and you've seen what people can do when they have power. But there's different types of power. And that's what we want to talk about here today. And I don't think educators like the word power. It's a terrible word, but it's a word that really defines what a person's ability is when they have a particular position. And according to research, there's actually 5 areas of power. So we're going to break down each one so you can get a concept of what power really is and how it is used. And then again, as we're talking and thinking about this, just think of those real world examples that immediately come to mind as we're talking about these things. So let's talk about each one of these. All right, first there's just legitimate power, and that's the power that comes because of your position. Now, you've earned a position. This is purely structural. It's a structural position. It is written into your contract. It is written into your title. It is who you are. So there is this legitimate power, and because of that legitimate power, people just naturally follow you because of your position and your title. To simply put, it's just it's an attained, earned structural position, and it comes with legitimacy. So whatever that title is, principal, dean, superintendent, provost, associate director, blah, blah, blah. That title gives and lends to a certain amount of power, and it automatically suggests that you are in a position of authority because of the structural title and power that you've been given. Now, this also goes hand in hand, but the second type of power is actually called reward power. And with reward power is that your ability, because of your position, you can give out those raises and promotions and awesome scheduling and other perks to people because of your position, because you have that because you have decision-making authority, that you can provide rewards to people based upon what you think they should be given. Promotions and raises, those sort of competitive things that people are always jockeying for, people in positions of authority and power can make those decisions. So being able to incentivize people is also a form of power. But the reverse is true too, and the third one is called coercive power. And coercive power is the ability to make people do what you want them because of your position of authority, to punish them or diminish them or demote them or treat them in an inferior way because you don't like them or you don't like the way they're performing or whatever. So while that individual can reward you, they can also treat them with coercive power, because that's what power can do to people, is that you can put you in a position to change a person's behavior in a direction that you want them to go. That's called coercive power. But the next one is called expert power, and this is the one that we're probably more familiar with here in our positions of academia and in education in particular. And expert power comes from a person's unique position to have knowledge and information. Like, for example, if you come across an individual that is an expert in a particular area and they possess a certain skill set or knowledge or information about something that other people don't know, don't understand, or can't explain, they come with expert power. For example, years and years and years ago, whenever there was a school funding crisis in the state of Texas, I was able to build out a blog and speaking tours and other things because I had a unique understanding of the way school funding worked, the formula system, why there were cuts across the state. And so because of that expert power, people came to me, asked me questions, came to my blog, went back in the day when we did blogs before podcasting. And so with that expert power comes expertise. Now, what's unique to that in our particular world is that when you have DR in front of your name, when you are a doctor, no matter the field that you've earned your doctorate, you have expert power, because earning a doctorate gives you that credibility because you have learned and studied and researched and have been granted that authority by other doctors. So no matter the field, you are already given that expert power. And we'll talk a little bit later the ethics that comes with having that expert power. But future doctors, you're going to have a very unique set of skills and knowledge and understanding. You're going to be your own form of Liam Neeson and Taken. You come with this very incredible set of skills, and with that comes an amazing expertise that people would then start looking to you with knowledge and information. That's called expert power. And the last form of power is called referent power. And referent power is just simply the charisma that comes with a leadership position, that because people follow you simply because they admire you and they like you and they value relationships that you have built with people. And I got to tell you, this is a relatively newer concept. I say newer, the last 20 years or so, where building relationships and connecting with people really, really matters. And so when you start building relationships and understanding where people are and their position in your organization, they begin to respect you. And with that comes a referent power. People are willing to defer to you as a leader because they respect you, they like you, they understand you, and you in turn are respectful, listen to people, and create an organization where people feel valued. Again, back to that conversation where feeling valued is an important aspect that people need to have. So referent power. So with that energy comes influence, and the ability to influence people, move them in a direction to whether you are persuading them in a rational way, or, as I tell my principal candidates, your ability to mobilize people in times of crisis or in times of needing to get very important things done. How do you motivate people and move them and mobilize them to conduct business, to conduct education, to do the things and do the work that needs to be done in an ethical way? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we can empower others, but using ethics and reasoning to do so. So let's move on to that. All right, so now that we've talked about power and influence, let's talk about ethics, because this really is the moral compass of leadership. I also talk about this with my principal candidates, and I'll talk about it with you too. We're all developing leadership here. And I mentioned to you about what gives you the right to lead. Like, why should I follow you, right? So we talked a little bit about that. But before we get into any rational reason why I should follow you, you as a leader need to have some sort of moral compass, whatever that looks like for you. And I ask my principal candidates to sort of go through a moral compass exercise to just sort of figure out their values, their ethics. Why are you in this business? Why do you want to be a leader? Because you really can't go into leadership unless you have some sort of ethical framework to operate under. And the truth is, let's be honest here. The truth of the matter is, no one really sits down and thinks about, what is my ethical framework? Let's think about this. Where do I come from as an ethical person? You know, it's not something that you really begin to draw that attention to yourself until you get into graduate school. So I ask my students to look deep inside of themselves to find out, what kind of leader do you even want to be? You're going into education. You're in the people business. You're working with individuals. You're trying to help make them successful. Something has to be guiding you. And I'm not talking about religion, although religion can enhance or aid your ethical and moral framework. But you've got to have some sort of North Star here. You've got to have a guiding sense about how you want to treat people, how you want to work with people, and what's the end game here. Because we've already talked about money. It's not the end-all, be-all motivating factor. You've got to love your work. And I'm sorry, but education, as we're talking about educational leadership, people come to this business because they like people and they want to see people succeed, and they feel altruistic about the work that they're doing. So there are 6 ethical frameworks, and then for your leadership case study we're working on, you're analyzing some of these based upon your individual degree track. So you have to sort of make ethical reasoning kind of visible in the work that you're doing. So I want to talk about 6 of these to give you a sense of which one is right for you. Let's talk about these and give you something to explore. So there's 6 of these. There's no single correct framework. You can use one. You can use combination of some. But what matters here is why these frameworks exist and how they fit into your individual core values. That's really what I want you to explore here. So let's take a look at these. All right, the first one is called utilitarian. The utilitarian lens. And this is essentially the greater good model. This is we want to do the best we can for everyone involved. You judge actions based upon the consequences of what could happen by making this individual decision. This is the moral dilemma of there is a train traveling and you see an individual in the train. Do you stop the train and potentially injure everyone on board, or do you risk hitting the person that's on the train? You've seen some of those moral, ethical dilemmas. It's something like that. I'm doing a terrible job explaining that one, but you get the idea. That's the one. It's the greater good. It's the making the best decision for the greatest amount of people involved. That's utilitarian. The second one is rights. Looking at everyone's rights. The rights lens, that's kind of what it's called. This is a very American framework here. This is the focusing on our fundamental moral rights of every individual that we are born with. We come into this world and we automatically have human rights. What's interesting, and we can get into the discussion, is what you think we are born with. What rights do you think we actually come to this world with? That's where the real framework discussion comes into play, because some people think healthcare is a right, some people don't. Some people think education is a right, some people don't. Some people think property ownership is a right, some people don't. So that's the whole fun about this discussion. But essentially, this framework tells us that we have moral rights. We are born with these individual rights, and it is the job of leadership to protect those rights. So that is the second framework, the rights lens. The third one is called virtue, the virtue lens. And this one, it's not really about rules or character, anything like that. It just asks a very simple question like, if I do this, if I make this decision, what kind of person am I going to be? What do we become as an organization, as an institution, by making this decision? That's what virtue is in this sense, this particular framework, by asking yourself, what kind of institution or person or organization do we want to be? Or if we make this particular decision, or if we grow in this direction, what will we become? That's the virtue lens. The fourth one is called the justice lens. And justice, essentially, it's about fairness. And it's about equity. And it's making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity, that everyone shares not only the good that comes with decision making or the organizational's growth or whatever, but you get the bad too. It's a perfect balance of justice across the board. I hate to use the word to define the word, but essentially you have to think about the scales of justice in this one, the balance between good and evil, the balance between fairness and equity, and everybody receive. And if one goes too low, then the other one gets too high. And how do we share that balance as an organization? But you can see this is very difficult. This is one that people could struggle with, trying to find what is just and equitable for everyone. And I will say, the equity discussion in education has taken its toll the last couple of years, not only just politically, but this conversation about what is equitable in education and how do we define this for everyone involved. So the justice lens is about leadership who can create that fairness and equity for everyone, and making sure that we share not only the good, but we share the burdens that come with it too. The fifth one is called the common good lens. And I want to get a little historical on this one because there was a concept in America, and I used to be a history teacher years ago. And even the Massachusetts and Virginia still refer to themselves as commonwealths, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Commonwealth of Virginia. And they haven't lost those terms in their legal vernacular because those territories and now states were developed with this particular framework in mind, the common good. The idea that the entire community is at stake and making decisions to protect the welfare and what's good, the common good, for the entire community as a whole. So with that, we all share in this. So it's not necessarily justice the justice lens is the sharing of the burdens because that is what's right and what's fair. The common good is the retaining of the burdens to protect our most vulnerable members of the community because they can't. That's the conversation we're having here. So the common good is prioritizing the community as a whole while protecting our most vulnerable members of that community and whatever that looks like. So a leadership mentality or a framework, this could be your guiding ethics, is that we have vulnerable members in our community, organization, institution, society, whatever. And we as an organization, as a community, have to do what we can to protect our most vulnerable because it protects our whole community by doing that. So that's the common good concept. The last one is called the care ethics lens, care ethics. And this one essentially is just relationships, empathy, independence. So it's working with others in a sense that we all have a role. And I have a trusting relationship with everyone. And I value the independence that you bring to this organization. And because of that, I want to be flexible in how I treat you. I want to be flexible in the rules that I put in place. And we don't have to have these abstract, rigid policies in place because I care about you as an individual. I care about the direction that you want to go in this organization. And because of that, I want to emphasize my care. I want to prioritize my relationship, and I want to prioritize the work that you do versus the work that I do in our organization. So it's a very care driven, obviously, care about the individual, and because I care about the individual, in turn that should shape and help the organization as a whole. All right, so that's kind of 6 big frameworks there. Think about them. Like one of those, and I got my notes in front of me, but one of those should really kind of resonate with you, right? Again, there's no correct framework here, and you can kind of see how these can kind of be interwoven with each other and kind of shared, and you can adopt more than one here. But which one of these kind of feels natural to you? Which one of these do you see most often in organizations you've worked with? And again, thinking about these in a real world context, can you identify with these? Can you see challenges with these? So think about that. That's going to help you as you progress towards your paper. So next we'll talk a little bit more about the human side of this. We'll touch a little bit more on emotional intelligence. So we talked a little bit about emotional intelligence last week. So we'll talk a little bit about more and then we'll get more into the conversation about being a follower. How do we follow leaders in these ethical contexts? Okay, last week we talked a lot about emotional intelligence, and the reality is, and I said it very frankly, you cannot be a leader unless you have some element of emotional intelligence. And you've got to have self-awareness, you've got to be able to self-manage, you have to have some social awareness, and you've got to be able to build relationships with people. If you can't do any of those 4 things, or if you struggle with any of those 4 things, you probably should re-examine your place in leadership. Okay, that's very, very simple. A leader has got to be able to have some emotional intelligence. And if you don't have emotional intelligence, or if you struggle in one of those 4 areas, let me tell you what they are again: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship building. If you struggle in any of those areas, you can start to see cracks in the foundation. The organization will begin to struggle because the leadership in place has the inability, again, that emotional intelligence, to recognize that there is something happening in their organization and there's something lacking in one of those 4 areas that they cannot address. Again, real world context. Think about times that you have seen this at play when leaders struggle with their own self-awareness or their own self-management, and then what happens in the aftermath of that. This is not an uncommon thing. It's totally been researched, and we can show and demonstrate that when leaders lack in one of these areas, the organization will begin to struggle. So with emotional intelligence comes organizational culture. And basically culture is the way we do things. That's it. That's what culture, and culture can be changed. We do things around here because of X, Y, and Z. So I want to talk about organizational culture real quick, and there's four types here. There's rules-based, there's values-based, there's self-driven or self-interest-driven, and then there's the caring or collectivist concept. We're going to break down each one. I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but organizational culture, how and why we do things around here, and essentially this is driven by leadership. Let's take a look at each one. Okay, let's take a look at the first two, rules and values. Rules is very simple. We do things around here because it's policy. Very simple. We do it because the rules say we have to do it, okay? So that you can have a culture completely based upon the simple fact that we've got policies and procedures in place to make sure that we're all acting a certain way. But there's also values-based, and values is simply we do it because it's our mission and it's who we are as an organization. That's a little bit different. You can still have policies and procedures built into place, but you don't have to tie everything back to that. Human behavior can be corrected through policies and procedures, but the reason that we do things as an organization can be driven by our values. We do it because it's our mission. The next one is self-interest. You see this a lot in higher education. Very simply put, it's every department or college or school or whatever for themselves, depending on the organization that you work for. I'm in academia, so I can talk in department and division and school and college concepts, but whatever organization you work with is obviously divided up in divisions too, and you can see in a self-interest driven culture, it's every department for themselves. Everybody creates their own systems for doing things. Everyone has their own procedures and their own policies. Everyone has their own directives. And then when you look across the board, particularly in the university setting, you might see that one college is really succeeding. Wow, look at that beautiful new building that they just got. How did they do that? And you look over here and go, we don't have what they have over there. Why is that happening? Well, because higher education is extraordinarily guilty for working in silos. And because we work in silos, we don't get to see what's outside of our silo. And there's a great TV show on Apple Plus called Silo, which I just thought of, and having this ADD moment for a second, that if you haven't watched it, you should watch it because conceptually it's kind of the same. What's happening in our silo is not happening in that silo over there, and it's really kind of weird and different. So with that, every department for themselves, everybody operates on their own self-interest, and you can see how this may not be the best setup for an organization. The last one is called caring or collectivist, and this is we do things because we are protecting our students. We are protecting each other, and we are protecting our students, or we are protecting our product, we are protecting whatever it is, and that if those things don't succeed, then we can't succeed as an organization. So those are how culture is built. Again, real quick on those. Not a whole lot that we need to talk about there, but it's really up to a leader to have the emotional intelligence to understand how those cultural aspects are working in their organization so that they can address crisis when it happens and they can navigate, individuals when they have problems. That's where the emotional intelligence comes in. So next, let's talk about followers. It takes a particular kind of person to want to be a follower. And I talked a little bit about that first follower concept earlier, and I'm going to post that video. It's a really, really, really cute video. But I kind of believe in that, you can't have leadership without followers. So we'll talk a little bit about the power of being a follower, the unsung heroes of leadership, and then we'll talk a little bit more about our paper, and then we'll wrap up. All right. When you get into a leadership position, and you start to diagnose your organizational culture, you start to look at the people that work with you, under you, you want to kind of ask yourself, what kind of people are these people? Who are these followers? It's not just about a paycheck, again. But if you're trying to develop a successful organization as a leader, you have to ask some very simple questions. And so here's 5 here based upon the work of Robert Kelly, The Power of Followership. This kind of asks the question, who are these people and why are they working for me? What kind of people are they? Are they alienated people? Which means they're capable, but they're kind of cynical. They're just disengaged. They're not really here. They're doing a job, but they're just doing it to get by. I think about this one in the government context where there's not really an incentive to work any harder or faster, or you just have this mediocre place in the organization, and so you just feel alienated. No one's motivated to do more than the job that they're doing right now. I did talk a little bit about this years ago, is that education generally is set up for mediocrity, but we need people who work above that. So how do we get to the next level? But I digress. So that's the first question. Are these alienated people? The second one you could ask is, are they conformists? Do they just do this job because they will follow me off of a cliff in both good and bad ways? Are they yes people? Kind of see a little bit in government sometimes where people will just say yes because they think that's what the leader wants to hear. So that's kind of a conformist mentality. Then you have pragmatists. These are the people that just want to keep their head down, do the work, and survive. They're just here. They're going along to get along, right? Or getting along to go along, however that phrase means. But pragmatists are just people who are just, I want to be left alone. I'm just here to do a job. I don't want any drama. I don't want any problems. I'm just trying to get by. Okay? Then you have your passive people. These are the people that need constant direction. These are the people that you've got to be constantly making sure they're there, that they're on time, they're turning in things, that they're participating, they're being collaborative. They're just taking up space. These are passive individuals who are just requiring constant direction from you. And these are the ones that I would say that you either need to coach them up or you need to coach them out. The last one are exemplary employees. These are obviously the model followers. These are independent, critical thinkers. They support the mission and vision of the organization. They will challenge your assumptions because they trust you and they have a relationship with you, even if it looks a little weird to them. But that's the employee model, obviously the follower model that you want to get to. But in the end, what we really want is we want people to feel safe enough to be able to talk about what's happening. They want to feel safe, question assumptions, grow the organization, and be part of the ethical framework that you're building. The old leadership adage is that I want to grow you into a leadership position so that you will take my job someday. That's really an altruistic way of thinking about leadership, is that you trust in your leadership ability so much that you're comfortable in building a person to take over for you someday. And I got to tell you, some leaders really struggle with that. But ultimately, if you want a healthy organization, that's what you want to grow to. All right, we've covered a lot. It's really hard to teach a doctoral class in the summertime. I got to tell you, because there's just so much information and you feel like you're cramming it all in a small space of time. Like, I don't even know when you have time to watch these videos. It takes me, I'm already 36 minutes into this, and I'm going to cut it down because you don't need to hear all of my ums and all the microphone gaffes that I do. So I'm going to cut it down. But the reality is that I don't even know when you have time to watch this stuff or listen to it. So that's why I put it on all these different platforms, and so that hopefully you can access it whenever you have time. But the paper is coming, and I just want to give you some tips and tricks that I think would be helpful. So just number one, make sure that you are writing the paper towards your individual track. So, if you're K-12 or nonprofit, or higher ed, whichever track that you're on, just make sure you're writing for that track, okay? Try to make that clear for me. This is, think of this as kind of the midpoint of the semester, even though technically, I guess, towards the end of the week is the midpoint, but you're going to encompass everything that we've talked about so far. So all of our leadership theories, emotional intelligence, everything we talked about this week, you want to try to encompass as much of that as you possibly can. If you only talk about ethical frameworks, you've kind of missed the point. We want to bring all of this discussion in that we've talked about so far. And don't reinvent the wheel here. You want to follow the blueprint that you've been given, the assignments on Canvas, and then there's a link that you click to show the full assignment. That's kind of your blueprint here. Okay, so just follow that, and if you follow that, you're going to have a clear introduction, talk about your track, talk about the frameworks, and then move right into the dilemma. Okay, and analyzing your dilemma. Layer in your leadership and ethical frameworks, weave in those human elements, talk about power, talk about culture, talk about influence, emotional intelligence, and then sort of close with justified evidence-based discussion. Don't stress yourself out of it, but just make sure you include all the elements that you need to. Follow the rubric. There's a rubric there. That's a good place to start too, to kind of see how you're going to be graded on this. And remember, this is a scholarly paper, okay? So 3 to 5 pages. Cite where you can. If there's some places that feel a little weird, I've already said, I don't know how you can really cite the scenario. So if you struggle with that, don't stress out about it. But when you mention a theory, cite the theory. Okay, we've had a few here, but like the emotional intelligence or French and Raven, the power sources, I try to attach a citation to it. And hey, no quick secret here, AI is good for that stuff. Okay, it really is. I'm fine with you using AI in this course. Don't use AI to write the paper, but you can use AI to help you with citations. I'm writing a book right now. I'm using AI to help me with some of these citations. It's so much easier to find if you're using AI to help you with some of that stuff. Okay, it really helps you clean up. Think of it as a productivity tool here. Okay. Don't use it to write the paper, but use it to help you with citations and clean up your APA formatting. That's really what this stuff should be used for. So when you're citing, a particular emotional intelligence or a framework or whatever, use AI to help you with the citation if you can't find it, okay? So that's it for the week, all right? I hope you had a good break. I hope you had a good week. If you have questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to email, support you in any possible way if you have questions. But as always, take care of yourself. Take care of each other, and we'll see you next week. Bye.